Hello there. Today, I'm going to be doing a review of the Rocky series. This is only going to be the Rocky films. I'm not going to be doing the Creed films because I haven't watched all of those. I've watched the first two, but I haven't watched the third one. So in the Rocky films, it's sort of divided into a few different styles. You've got like the more drama-based films, which is like 1 and 2, and then you've got like 3 and 4, which is more sort of montage type shit. It has a higher focus on montages, especially Rocky 4. That film is literally like 40% montages. And then with like Rocky 5 and Rocky Balboa, they sort of try to go back to that more gritty drama style. And personally, I like all of the films, honestly. Even Rocky Balboa. I watched all the movies again recently because I grew up watching these films. I used to own these films on VHS, so I'm quite familiar with the series. I watched them again recently, and man, these films are awesome. Every single film is good. Some are weaker than others, and Rocky Balboa, I went into it kind of judging it harshly because there are certain things that I don't like about it. I think what it is with that film is that Rocky is just some old-ass bum at that point, you know? And watching some near 60-year-old dude fight some young boxer is just stupid, you know? It's really stupid, and I think it's just embarrassing is what it is, you know? I think Rocky Balboa should have just been about Rocky's life after Rocky 5. He didn't need to go back into the ring, you know, and fight again. I thought that was just unnecessary. I know that would have been controversial because it's a boxing series, but it could have had boxing involved in the film, but I don't know why Rocky had to do the boxing himself. Like in Rocky 5, he didn't do any boxing, but it still had, obviously, Tommy Gunn, where he was involved with boxing and he was the coach. They could have done something like that, you know. So yeah, starting off with Rocky 1, I think Rocky 1 is probably the best film in the series. Maybe 2 is the best, but this film is just really good, you know. It's really good drama. It's obviously where Rocky's story starts. He starts off as this underground boxer that nobody knows, fighting these, as Mickey would say, bombs, which I love that character, by the way. This film, this series, is full of awesome characters, man. And I really like Mickey. He has some great lines. Really good performance by Burgess Meredith, I believe he's called. I like that one scene where the two girls want an autograph from Rocky and he basically tells them to piss off. He's just really good character. And yeah, I really like the opening where it starts off in that church and you have that cool little shot of that, like a mural or some shit. So that's a really cool little intro right there to the series. And yeah, Rocky starts off as this, basically a bum fighter fighting other bums, and he's struggling in life. He's got a really shitty record, and he's doing side work as like not a mob member, but he works for the mob, like collecting cash and shit. But he's not really cut out for that life because he doesn't have that in him, you know? He's not a mean guy like that. I mean, he even lets that one guy off, like he threatens to break his thumb, but he doesn't because he has a heart, you know? He doesn't want to do that type of shit. And Rocky is just a really likable character. Really likable character, you know? You actually feel for him as you're watching him. You know, he's living in this shitty flat with his turtles. He's not exactly having the best life. You know, he's a struggling boxer fighting shitty fighters for really low pay. And I think that's what makes Rocky such a good character, is that he's very relatable, you know. I think we've all been in his shoes where we've been struggling to, you know, to get on our feet out there, you know, to make some good money and to actually have a relatively happy life, you know. Eventually, he gets an opportunity at the World Heavyweight Championship against Apollo Creed, because what happens is the person that was supposed to fight Apollo gets like injured, so then Apollo's like, you know what, let's fight some underground boxer that nobody's ever heard of, and he likes the name as well, the Italian Stallion versus Apollo Creed, so he wants to fight Rocky. He wants to give him an opportunity at the title. And then at first, Mickey actually takes away Rocky's locker. He doesn't want anything to do with him, basically, because he feels like he didn't put in the work to be a great fighter, you know. He felt like he didn't have that, he wasn't hungry enough. So he took away his locker, he basically didn't waste his time with anymore. But then when he got a shot at the title, when he got offered a shot, he saw an opportunity for Rocky to be that great fighter that he wanted him to be. Because at first, you think that Mickey's just being some arsehole that takes away his locker, but then as the movie goes along, you get that development between the two characters, you realise that Mickey's this old guy who's wasted a lot of years on Rocky, and he felt like he didn't put in the heart and the work that he should have to be a potentially great fighter. And I really like the scene as well where Mickey goes to Rocky's house and Rocky has that meltdown, he's punching the door and shit. It's a really good performance, you really feel for him. And then Mickey leaves and Rocky chases after him, because you know that deep down he doesn't hate him, he's just upset because he feels betrayed about the locker and so on. But then he runs after him after letting out his frustration and they make up. It's a really good scene, good camera shot in the distance. I really like how you can't hear the conversation, because just the body language does the talking, you know, just the talking for itself. And yeah, it's a nice scene with the good music, and anybody that's watched Rocky knows just how amazing the soundtrack is in this entire series. Obviously, you have the main plot of Rocky training and fighting Apollo Creed, but then you have a side plot, which is obviously a big part of the film, which is his relationship with Adrian. Adrian starts off as this really shy girl working in a pet shop, but then Rocky brings her out of her shell. And I think Rocky and Adrian are just such a cute couple. They really feel made for each other, because Adrian's this shy girl who's trapped in a shell, and Rocky's this sort of socially awkward guy who's not really that good at talking to women. And I think they make a really good couple, and the scene on the ice rink is a really good scene. You could just see Rocky making an absolute fool of himself, but Adrian just appreciates the attention, you know. She feels like she doesn't get any attention from anyone. The only attention that she basically gets is from her brother Paula, another great character, a really good comedic character. He basically mentally abuses her, makes her feel like shit, makes her feel really small, but then Rocky makes her feel good about herself, you know, and gets her to come out of her shell. And then, of course, you've got the amazing training montages. Like, every film has a montage, but you've got one in Rocky 1. I'm not sure which movie has the best one, but they're all good, you know. All the montages are good. And the music as well is just phenomenal. Like, Better Fly Now, you know, the main theme is absolutely incredible. It's so inspirational. It really gets you pumped up. And it really adds to those montages. Like, without that music, those montages just wouldn't hit the same. So he trains for the fight, and then eventually he throws down with Apollo, one-on-one in the ring, and he ends up losing. And I really like this as well, because even though he's the underdog, and you want to see him succeed, I just feel like it's a lot more realistic, you know? Having him overcome this really good fighter, Apollo Creed, who is undefeated, by the way. He's seen as this unstoppable fighter that can't be beaten, you know. He's like 40-0 or some shit, so he's a really good fighter. So to have this underground fighter with a bad record come and beat him would be a bit ridiculous. So, but instead, rather than having him win and overcome the impossible challenge, they have him basically go the distance and give it all he has, you know, put all of his heart and soul into it. He keeps on getting back up, he keeps on going, keeps on fighting, and he won't give up. I think that's way better than having him win, because it's all about determination and persistence and giving it your all. Oh yeah, and also Apollo Creed is this really cocky fighter that obviously wants to destroy Balboa, and when he goes the distance, he's really shocked and he feels like he didn't win. And while he's worried about if he won or not, Rocky doesn't even care. He just cares about Adrian. He's screaming for her, and he just wants to see her, you know. And then it ties in perfectly with the second film, where Apollo Creed, even though he won, he feels like he didn't beat him. He even says, "I won, but I didn't beat him." And it makes a lot of sense why he wants to rematch him, you know, because his trainer is like, why do you want to fight this bum, you know, let's go fight some real fighters. But for him, it's not about the title, it's not about the the money, it's about the pride, the honor. And he wants to prove that he is the superior fighter because a lot of people feel like Rocky should have won. So at the beginning, they're in the wheelchairs and Apollo Creed wants to have a rematch, but because of the damage that was done to Rocky's eye in the first fight, he doesn't want to fight, he wants to retire. He gets a nice pay from the fight and he goes out blowing it all on cars and jackets and shit. And he ends up basically spending it all, gets a house as well. And he has to go out and find a job. He gets married to Adrian, he has a child, not like right away, but at the end of the film. And then he starts working where Paulie works with like meat and shit. So he goes and works like packing meat and shit, and it's a really low paying job because he doesn't have any qualifications, so he has to do some shitty work with very little pay. He's sort of back where he was in the first film, where he's struggling to make ends meet. But eventually, Rocky decides that he doesn't want to be a meat packer. He's not qualified to do any job with meaningful pay. So he wants to get back into fighting because he feels like that's what he was meant to do. It's the only thing he's good at. But because of his eye, which could potentially make him go blind if he suffered any more trauma to it, Adrian obviously doesn't want him to. She wants him to stay retired. But he basically says, I'm sorry, I know you don't want me to fight, but it's what I want to do, and he turns his back on her. He doesn't leave her, but he goes against her wishes. So he goes and trains with Mick at his gym, and you can see that he's just not putting in the effort that he was in the first film. He doesn't have the hunger, as Mick would say. He's not hungry like he was before. And it leads to one of my favourite scenes in the series where he's putting away his stuff in the locker and then Mickey comes up to him and calls him a bum. You're fighting like a bum out there. I really like that scene. It's a really good scene. And then his wife goes into labour, she has the kid, and she ends up going into a coma. So he spends every day with her, holding her hand, reading to her as well, because earlier in the film, he couldn't read in that commercial, and he started to learn to read when they're in bed and stuff, so he would read to her, and eventually she wakes up. And then when she does wake up, she sort of realizes that even though she doesn't want Rocky to get hurt, she realizes that it's what he wants to do, and he supports him and tells him, go win, go win the fight. And it gives Rocky the motivation to go out there and work his arse off and give it all he's got. Just like the first film, you got another awesome montage where you have the kids following him up those stairs. I can't remember the name of those stairs, I always forget. But yeah, a really good training montage. Once again with better fly now. It's a really good montage, really gets you pumped up for the fight. And then you have the fight itself, which he ends up winning. He overcomes Apollo, he goes the full distance, and right at the end, they both get knocked down, and Rocky is the one to get up in time. But Apollo doesn't, and he wins. And after that, even though Apollo was constantly shit-talking, and felt like he was a bum, and felt like he didn't win the previous fight, like he was just some chump, he finally gives him the props, he finally gives Rocky his respect, and he even hands him the title himself, and they become friends in the next film as well. And then at the end, when Rocky is holding up the belt, and he goes, Adrian, I did it! That shit is a really good moment as well. You really feel like he deserves it, So I'm going to start speeding through this a little bit, because I just realised that the recording is getting pretty damn long. So, on to Rocky 3. Rocky's on the top of the world, he's heavyweight champion, he's won like 10 straight fights, and he's basically become sort of a cocky fighter that doesn't have the hunger anymore. He's fighting these bums. He even has the scene with Mickey where he wants to fight Clubber Lang, who is the next opponent, played by Mr. T. I really like Mr. T in this film, by the way. He has some really good moments. I love the trash talking, where he's at the statue, and then he goes and faces him, and he's fucking heckling Rocky and shit, and talking shit to Mickey, telling him to shut up and that. Really funny shit. Really good performance, dude. Really good villain. And then Rocky wants to fight him, but Mickey's basically like, this guy will kill you, And even though you're on a winning streak, you've basically been fighting chumps, People that are good fighters, but they're not hungry, they're not killers like this guy, as he says in the film. Mickey doesn't believe in him, he doesn't feel like he has that hunger anymore, because he doesn't. He's basically become a cocky fighter that isn't taking it seriously anymore. Like, even with the first fight, he's not training properly. He's like showing off to women and shit, and he's not taking it as seriously as he should. Mickey wants to go work in the old gym and go, do what they do, but he's too interested in showing off and not taking it seriously. You got like music playing in the background, and you could just tell he's not the same person he was in the first two films. He's sort of been blinded by the fame and the success and the money, and eventually, when they do fight, he ends up losing. That's also because Mick ends up dying. Rocky and Clubber end up getting into a bit of a scuffle before the fight, and Mickey gets hurt. He gets knocked over by Clubber, and he ends up having a heart attack, and he dies. Oh yeah, by the way, but this movie has way too much unnecessary shit in it, like the fight with Thunderlips. That scene is a really fun scene. It's really wacky and just ridiculous. It is enjoyable, but this movie is not as long as the first two. The first two were like 2 hours, but this one is only like 100 minutes or something. So to have this long-ass sequence with him facing off against Hulk Hogan is just kind of a waste of time. Like, you could have had it in there, but they should have made the movie longer to have, obviously, the important stuff, like the drama and shit. I think this is definitely one of the weakest in the series. It is a good film, and it does have some really good moments with, obviously, Mickey's death is a really sad moment. You can see Rocky, he's heartbroken and shit, he's wailing and shit, and it's a really sad moment. Him meeting Apollo again and training with him is a really cool moment, a really cool montage with them running on the beach. Clubber Lang is a really good villain, really well played by Mr. T, a really good trash talker, really funny moments and shit. But with the unnecessary Hulk Hogan fight and the shorter length, with obviously less build-up and less, and also with the final fight being by far the weakest, it doesn't even go more than 4 rounds, I don't believe. It's just this short fight where Rocky basically baits Clubber into gassing himself out, and then he takes advantage and knocks him out. It's definitely a pretty weak fight. So yeah, it's a good film. It's got a lot of good moments, but I think out of the entire series, it's definitely one of the weakest. But then after Rocky 3, you have, in my opinion, one of the best in the series, which is Rocky 4. This film is kind of a guilty pleasure because it's sort of strayed away from the gritty drama of the first two, and it's gone into full-blown action and montages, like I said earlier, but this film is literally like 40% montages, but it's great, all the montages are awesome, great music in this film. The soundtrack is probably the best in the series. It doesn't have Better Fly Now, which is a shame, because that's in every single film, but the tracks are amazing. You got Hearts on Fire, you've got Easy Way Out, you've got the training music in the first training montage, and then you've got War, which is played during the fight with Ivan Drago. And Ivan Drago is a great villain, by the way. He's a really intimidating foe, really big, muscular dude. He's like 6'5". He's portrayed as this killing machine, this unstoppable force that will fucking kill Rocky just like he did to Apollo, because, well, he ends up killing Apollo in the ring. Apollo comes out of retirement, he underestimates Ivan Drago, sees him as this amateur fighter, and he ends up getting killed by him, A part of that is due to Rocky's negligence. He doesn't throw in the towel, because basically Apollo has too much pride that he will not let Rocky throw in the towel, and he ends up getting killed. So even though this film is just mostly montages and it doesn't have the gritty drama from the first two, so even though the film is mostly montages, that is a huge part of its charm, The montages are really epic and the music is great, and also the final fight against Ivan Drago is one of the best in the series. It has one of the best soundtracks in the entire series, which is War. Super badass, really gets you pumped up. Like, just go listen to it, it's fucking phenomenal. And even though people were doubting Rocky, including his own wife, he ends up overcoming this Goliath, which is Ivan Drago, and he ends up beating him. On to Rocky 5, which is directly after Rocky 4. So he comes home from Russia, and he finds out at the doctors that he has suffered brain damage, so he ends up having to retire for good. Oh yeah, by the way, but the whole eye injury thing just sort of gets swept under the rug. It never gets brought up again after 2. I think they wanted you to forget about it so they could pump out more sequels, but it never gets brought up. Or at least I don't think it does. So yeah, he comes home, he's got brain damage from the ruthless beating from Ivan Drago, and Paulie ends up fucking losing all of Rocky's money to some like investors or some shit. So Rocky goes broke, loses all his money, loses his house, all of his cars and shit, and he moves back to Philadelphia, which is where the first film took place. So after Rocky 3 and Rocky 4, they wanted to go back to that gritty style of the first 2 films, so they made Rocky poor, they had him retire, they moved back to Philadelphia, and instead of having him fight, they had him train this young boxer named Tommy Gunn. I think in the entire series, this is by far the worst film. Even Sylvester Stallone himself hates this film. I don't think it's as bad as people say. I think it's an enjoyable film, but it's definitely got its flaws. I think one of the biggest issues was what they did with Rocky and his son, because rather than Rocky giving a shit about his son, he basically ignores the fuck out of him and goes and trains Tommy instead. And like Rocky and Tommy become this close, you know, father and son type thing, trainer and student type thing, which doesn't really make sense because it's just not really presented that way in the film. It feels like a lot of shit is left unexplained. Like Rocky gives Tommy his, I think it's a cufflink that he was given to by Mickey. So the fact that he gives that to Tommy rather than his own son doesn't make sense. I mean, why would you do that, really? You gotta give it to this guy rather than your own son? Rocky is just portrayed as this really neglectful father that just doesn't give a shit about his son, you know? His son's getting bullied at school. He even stands up to the bully, kicks the shit out of him, and gets his coat back, which was stolen by him, and Rocky just doesn't care. I just think it's bad character development, because Rocky isn't that type of guy. Rocky was always this guy that was a really caring person that cared about the people around him. You know, he loves his wife, he loves his kid, he loves Paula, he loves everyone, you know? He's a very caring person, so to have him neglect his son like that was just really, it just didn't make sense, and I thought it was bad writing. And then you've also got the relationship with him and Tommy, like I said, it wasn't developed, you know? With him giving Tommy his cufflink, his necklace, it's implied that they're really close, but you don't see that, you know? It's just not presented in the film. And then eventually, Tommy ends up turning his back on Rocky. He gets a new manager, which is like a... What the hell's his name, dude? The guy that trained Mike Tyson, he's basically like a parody of him. He gets him as his manager or whatever, and he wins the championship. And instead of thanking Rocky, who trained him the entire film, he thanks that guy, which is... What the hell's his name, dude? It's that black guy. He's called... I think he's called George Washington Duke or something. So instead of thanking Rocky, which you would expect, he thanks the black guy, and Rocky obviously feels really hurt, really betrayed. So Tommy Gunn is just a fucking dick, you know? He doesn't care about Rocky. All he cares about is the fame, the money, the championship, and he's a disgrace, pretty much, you know? And then they have an interview after he wins the belt, and he's got a bunch of, like, interviewers and shit asking him questions, and it ends up being like a comparison between him and Rocky, and then Tommy ends up getting angry because the press are saying that he's a disgrace, he's a paper champion, you know, and that Rocky was a infinitely superior fighter, and he ends up getting pissed off about that, and he wants to prove him wrong. So he goes to a bar that Rocky's in, and he challenges him to a fight, but because Rocky's retired, he doesn't want to, so he ends up punching Paulie because he calls him a piece of garbage. And then Rocky gets pissed off about that, obviously, and he goes and has a street fight with him outside. And even though the street fight is pretty cool, it's obviously not a traditional Rocky boxing match. It's still cool though. It's pretty much a squash fight though, because even though Tommy knocks him down, he gets up in traditional Rocky fashion and knocks him out. And then after that, you have a scene where he's going up those Philadelphia stairs with his son, and then he gives him the bloody necklace, and yeah. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, but eventually his son gets sick of his dad and ends up misbehaving, going out and drinking and smoking and shit. And then Rocky comes and finds him, has a small chat with him, and then all of a sudden they're fucking all made up again. It's just not well written, you know? It could have been a lot better. And then finally, we get on to Rocky Balboa, which I initially shit on before because, like I said, I just saw this as a film about some old washed out fighter way past his prime, unnecessarily getting back into the ring for another fight. And the boxing itself is definitely the weakest part. He didn't need to get into the ring. It could have just been a drama about Rocky's life after Rocky 5, because it does have some good drama in there, like with him getting over the loss of his wife, who gets killed off screen, which is, I don't know how I feel about that. I think that's kind of lazy, but it is a pretty good drama with his son being distant, and then he wants to obviously have a relationship with him. He's got his own restaurant, which he names after Adrian. He even has a Spider Rico from the first film, who comes and works in his restaurant or some shit, I can't remember. And it turns out that he didn't have brain damage after all, so he wants to get back into the ring for one last fight. And yeah, it's definitely not great. I think it's definitely one of the weakest, but it's not as bad as I remember it being. It's a pretty good drama. If they'd focus more on the drama about Rocky's life after Rocky 5, rather than having it be about him wanting to get back into the ring, then I think that would have been better. They could have made it something like Rocky 5, where he becomes a trainer, which they eventually did in Creed, because in Creed he becomes the trainer of Adonis Creed, and then they go down that path of him being a trainer rather than a fighter, which was a good direction. I'm not the biggest fan of those films, but it was definitely the right direction to go if you're going to keep on making Rocky films, because you couldn't have him be like 70 still fighting. That would just be fucking stupid. It was already bad enough in Rocky Balboa. He was like 60 in that film, and he's fighting some young fighter in his prime, and then Rocky, even though he loses, he goes the distance, and it's just unrealistic, you know? And even though the films have never been realistic, they're very exaggerated with how the fighters can just shrug off like these massive haymakers and shit. It was entertaining, you know? And that was a huge part of the charm in these films, was just how exaggerated it was with the ridiculous haymakers that Rocky could just defend with his face. You know, he never blocked or anything. In Rocky Balboa, they sort of wanted to make it more realistic with the realistic TV presentation type thing, which I didn't like that at all. I thought it was so generic. I way prefer the old 70s and 90s montage type exaggerated fights with the iconic punching sound effects. I love those punching sound effects in like Rocky 4 and stuff, where it sounds like a gunshot. It's just good shit. So yeah, that was my review of the Rocky saga. I think I talked about everything that I wanted to talk about. I probably didn't, because there was just that much stuff, and obviously you can't talk about every little thing, otherwise this video would be like 4 hours long. But yeah, those are my 2 cents on the Rocky series. A classic series. I love these films. They're still great 40 years later. They're still great films to watch. So if you haven't watched them, then give them a watch. You know, they're great films. They really hold up. So I hope you enjoyed. Feel free to leave your comments. Let me know what you think. And I will see you in the next one. Take care, everyone. Sayonara.